saw. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and Senate Select Intel Committee, and he has been isolating just like the rest of us. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, there's a little bit of a delay here. Let's start with, what do you make of the president's plan to reopen the country?
The president's plan is measured, it's judicious, it's the right approach. We can't set an arbitrary deadline. We can't have a single plan for the entire country. Obviously, some parts of the country have been hit very hard, like New York or Detroit, but other parts of the country, especially the rural parts, have seen very few cases at all. And as long as that remains the case, I think it's the right thing to do to encourage our governors to begin on a slow, gradual, calibrated basis to get people back to work, to get people back to their normal routines, taking appropriate measures like maintaining distances at the workplace or in shops, wearing masks, and so forth. Obviously, we have to be prepared for any surge in new cases as we begin to do that, but I think it's the right approach to begin to get the economy back on its feet.
Okay, let's talk about the letter that Republicans sent to the president talking about funding for the WHO. I know that now Democrats are saying that he's violating the same spending laws that brought about impeachment. They're talking about impeachment again. The president's not allowed to do this and take away funding from the WHO. So in the letter that the Republicans sent, it said basically we need to just get the leader out of the WHO and then we'll continue funding. Here's an excerpt from the letter that was sent. We have lost faith in Director General Tedros' ability to lead the World Health Organization. We understand and value the vital role that the WHO plays around the world, especially in acute humanitarian settings. We recommend that you condition any future fiscal year 2020 voluntary contributions to the WHO on the resignation of Director General Tedros. Have you heard anything from the president on that? Is he going to recommend the firing of him?
Well, I think the only way we can have confidence in the WHO in the short term is if Dr. Tedros and his senior team leaves. He has a well-established reputation for corruption, going back to being a minister in Ethiopia when China was handing out bribes there as part of their Belt and Road initiative. And going back to the earliest days of this pandemic, the WHO, under his leadership, seemed to prioritize political correctness and sucking up to China, not trying to focus on what their name calls for, which is world health.
Right. There's been a problem. We allowed China to get dominance in there, dating back 2 administrations, and we found ourselves caught. Meanwhile, let's talk about China. We watched Japan make a national movement to pull manufacturing out. We've seen statements from the UK and France showing how upset they are with the lack of transparency with this whole pandemic that has poisoned 180 countries. So right now, with their economy shrunk at 7%, what, Senator Tom Cotton, do you think should be the next step as more and more focus is on that lab in Wuhan that you talked about in January, where you thought this thing could have emanated from?
Yeah, Brian, the circumstantial evidence, which I began to cite in January, is stacking up pretty quickly that this virus may have originated in those labs in Wuhan. We knew from the very beginning that the Chinese Communist Party's front story about the food market was probably wrong. For one, it appears that they don't even sell the kind of bats at that market from which this virus originated. And two, Chinese scientists in an authoritative study as early as January found that about a third of the early cases had no contact with the food market whatsoever. We know that China has a very sloppy history of laboratory safety. Some of our own diplomats at the embassies in China went to these labs as far back as 2 years ago and said the practices there were very alarming. And you can see how the Chinese Communist Party has continued to lie about this from the very beginning as if they have something to cover up. If that's the case, it really is the biggest, the costliest, the most deadly cover-up in the history of mankind.
No kidding. Senator, let me ask you about this. You know, a lot of people wound up with $1,200 directly deposited in their accounts over the last week or so. But because there's been such conflicting signals from Washington about, you know, the SBA has, Small Business Administration has run out of money right now for these loans, and people don't know exactly what the next step is until the Senate does something and Congress does something. But regarding just those checks that people have gotten, oddly, it seems like there's a lot of misinformation. I had 2 people ask me, they said, okay, that $1,200, I've got to pay it back next year, right? And I said, no, you get to keep that. This is not a loan or anything like that. It's to stimulate the economy and to get you to buy groceries and everything like that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. For anyone making less than $75,000 or any family making less than $150,000, it's $1,200 a person, $500 per child. Those are simply payments designed to help our people get through the worst of this crisis. It doesn't have to be paid back in the future. It's designed to make sure that you can put food on the table at the end of the week, that you can pay the bills and keep a roof over your kid's head at the end of the month as we get through the worst of this crisis, hopefully sooner rather than later. Those checks are designed as an emergency lifeline for our families.
Senator, our anchor and friend Bret Baier, who lives in D.C., is talking to these lawmakers on both sides, left and right. And he said that they're discussing a possible payback for China. And one path could be suing China, class action lawsuit for their negligence in this. Is that possible?
Yeah, Ainsley, with legislation I've introduced with Dan Crenshaw, it will be possible. It amends the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, which allows foreign officials to be sued in our courts. This is exactly what Congress did for the victims of 9/11. We should do it for the victims of this pandemic. That's just one step that we can take. There's a lot of other things we can do as well. For instance, revoking Chinese visas for the kids of Chinese oligarchs who are studying in advanced scientific, computer science, and other kinds of technological fields. They go back to the United States. Or simply bringing back more of our manufacturing capacity so we can create jobs here, jobs that are going to help ensure our safety and our health in the future.
Senator, I'm going to put you in a difficult position. I'll put you in the White House for a second. The president's in a tough spot. He's close to doing a deal with the other economic behemoth, and that's China. At the same time, he knows they're responsible. At the same time, he knows currently we have a lot of our manufacturing there and a lot of our PPE we need to come out of there. How do you do this gradually in a way that's diplomatically savvy and not emotional at a time like this where currently we are interlocked?
Yeah, Brian, sadly, we're in the situation where China does have the market cornered on things like masks and gloves and other medical supplies, even on some of the components for testing. And just this week, it was reported that China is withholding a lot of that medical equipment from the United States on spurious grounds. So obviously, we don't want to rush into this change. We don't want to say that we're going to put import bans on Chinese goods in place next week, because we have to have those goods now to protect our doctors and our nurses and all the people who are struggling with this virus. But we also have to begin to plan for how we're not going to be dependent on China in the future, because this cannot be allowed to ever happen again.
Yep.
Can't react
We've got to make our
Thanks
own
so much.
stuff. All right. Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for joining us from the D.C.
Thank you all.